What's going on, everyone? Hope everyone was able to have a happy holidays and spend the time with their family, have a great time with their family, friends, whoever they chose to spend it with. And I am definitely wishing you a happy New Year's. We're back here with another edition of the tier system in the NBA, my rankings, my tiers of how the NBA has looked over the past few weeks. A lot's happened since, we were last together. So let's not waste any time. Let's just get into it. So I always want to start this out. I always want to start my tier video out giving a look back on the tiers that I had last time we were together, right? And this was how it looked, right, in terms of who we had in each tier respectively. And now I want to go in and take a look at how things are looking now. So at the bottom, right, the rebuilding directionless tier, you'll see the Charlotte Hornets have since dropped to that tier. The Toronto Raptors, the Brooklyn Nets have also dropped to that tier as well. And then we proceed to the other mainstays of this tier, including the Portland Trailblazers, the Utah Jazz, the New Orleans Pelicans, and the Washington Wizards. So that is the rebuilding / directionless tier. Moving up a tier, we're going to take a look here at the trying to find themselves tier. Right, and in this tier, you'll see a team made a jump from directionless and rebuilding to trying to find themselves, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers. Got to give them props, man. This has been a nice month of December for this Philadelphia team, right? They were 9-3 over the course of December. They were top 10 in offensive rating and defensive rating. They beat Boston earlier in the week, or on Christmas Day, Joel Embiid, even though he's only played in 6 out of those 12 games, or 7, out of those 12 games, he's averaging 26 points per game, along with 6.7 boards, 4.0 assists, off 48.4 shooting from the field and 40% from three. And then obviously Tyrese Maxey, who's having himself a nice solid season, averaging 25.8 points per game, off 42% from the field and 35.1% shooting from three, with 4 boards and 6.2 assists to go along with it. So Philly, a team I'm keeping my eye on, right? They're now 11th in the East. They're nipping at the tails of the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons currently hold that 10 seed. So if the playoffs were to start today, or the play-in were to start today, the Detroit Pistons would have an opportunity to put themselves in a position to possibly go into the playoffs. But the Philadelphia 76ers are hot on their heels. Another team I wanted to bring attention to in this trying to find themselves tier is the Sacramento Kings. Sacramento Kings recently, as everyone has heard at this point, decided to part ways with head coach Mike Brown, and I wanted to give my thoughts on this decision and whether or not it was the right or wrong decision. Look, Sacramento, nobody's in Sacramento should be thrilled on getting off to a 14-19 start to the season. Everyone knows that is underachieving the expectations this team had coming in. Well, I mean, for me personally, I didn't really have a high expectation for the Sacramento team, but at the same time, I'm sure nobody in Sacramento predicted that they'd be where they are. That being the case, it's always super easy to place that level of blame, to always scapegoat the head coach when things go wrong, right? Obviously, Mike Brown, a couple of seasons ago, won the Coach of the Year award in the NBA, right? And obviously, he was getting his flowers. The Sacramento Kings were second in the West at that point in time. They did have an early playoff exit to the tenured Golden State Warriors, but at the same time, I still think that team overachieved. The Light the Beam was becoming a whole thing. The Sacramento Kings were hot at that point in time. But when you take a step back and really look at what maybe not as much coaching decisions were made, but to me, personnel decisions were made since then, I place more of the blame on the start for Sacramento on the front office, right? So at the end of the day, when I look at what the Sacramento Kings had coming into this offseason, if you remember, right, when I made my offseason rankings of, acquisitions and changes made by team to team coming into the 2024-2025 campaign, I gave Sacramento a B-, and I wanted it to be lower, but I didn't know how the DeMar DeRozan experiment would work. Sacramento last season was not a strong three-point shooting team. They ranked 16th in the league, which is technically the bottom half of the league as it pertains to three-point percentage. They were not strong at shooting the three ball coming in. How did they address that? How did they fix that? Well, they brought in a guy in DeMar DeRozan who is a career 29.7% shooter from three. Right, so you brought in a guy who shoots virtually 30% from three, doesn't really usually take a lot of them too, into an offense that already struggled shooting the three ball. right? When you look at the Sacramento team, one of the weaknesses that they had was they needed a third scorer. And I thought, in a way, DeMar DeRozan could be utilized in such a fashion, could be utilized in such a way to maximize getting more out of a Sabonis and a De'Aaron Fox. But to this point, Sacramento has been unable to do that. And if you delve into the larger picture of where they are as a team, I mean, like right now they're 12th in the West, right? 24th in three-point percentage. And this is where, to me, the biggest impact is felt. They're about an average team defensively, but because they're 24th in three-point percentage and don't shoot the three relatively well, and then they rank 27th in opponent three-point percentage, that to me is a disadvantage off the bat, right? They're 24th in assist percentage. They don't really do a great job of moving the ball. And another aspect, another area where they're weak is with depth. That bench unit for Sacramento is not nearly where it needs to be. They rank 28th in the NBA in bench points at 26.1 points per game. To me, it is a personnel thing. When I look at Mike Brown, yes, you know, some of it, there's blame to go around on players, there's blame to go around on coaches, but to me, I don't look at the Sacramento roster, right? There was a reason I had them ranked where they were. It wasn't because of coaching. It wasn't because I didn't think De'Aaron Fox was good enough. It wasn't because I didn't think Sabonis was good enough. I had questions about the fit with DeMar DeRozan, right? I had questions about what this team did to address the issue, specifically the three-point shooting coming into the season. And as we're seeing, by them being 24th in the league in three-point percentage, they weren't addressed. They weren't fixed. So when I look at it from that perspective, I can't put all the blame solely on Mike Brown, who I know is one damn good coach. So at the end of the day, when I look at it from that perspective, when I evaluate it, I don't think this was a good decision. I don't know if anybody is ever going to be able to come into this situation and fix it, right? And now we're hearing rumblings that De'Aaron Fox may want out as well. It's trending towards an interesting scenario for the Sacramento Kings team where they actually might even be rebuilding, because to me, you get rid of Fox, you might as well start selling the whole rest of the team, right? You might as well see what you can get for a Sabonis, start trying to build towards the draft and trying to build a different team that way, especially with the talent coming in this next season in the NBA, or, you know, so many experts would say this is a talented draft class coming into next season. So not a fan on how they moved in terms of firing Mike Brown. Still here in this tier, in this trying to find themselves tier. They have time to turn it around. Maybe the interim head coach Doug Christie can get it, kind of figure things out, but I don't have a ton of faith in what's going on currently in Sacramento. Who else is in this tier? Obviously the Phoenix Suns, the Detroit Pistons, the San Antonio Spurs, who I think have played pretty solid over the course of the past few weeks, the Indiana Pacers, who are starting to find themselves as well, and the Los Angeles Lakers, another team I want to bring some attention to here. I mean, this Los Angeles Lakers team recently made an acquisition, right? They recently traded for Dorian Finney-Smith. So in this Dorian Finney-Smith trade for the Lakers acquired both Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton in exchange for D'Angelo Russell and Maxwell Lewis and 3 future second-round picks. This is, I don't know how big of a deal this is, to be quite honest with you. It's not a needle mover. I do see the perspective of why the Lakers made this deal. I mean, Dorian Smith, after all, is shooting 45.9% from the field, 43.5% from three. He's averaging 10.4 points per game, 4.6 boards, and 1.6 assists. He has a 113 defensive rating, which is top 5 for the Nets, and also led Brooklyn in defensive win share. So you're getting a guy that can, you know, knock down the three. You're getting a guy that can defend at a pretty high level. This is a guy that also shoots 48% on open threes and 42.5% on wide open threes, right? So you're getting a guy that can defend at a high level, and you're also getting a guy that can knock down open shots, open looks once LeBron and AD, you know, draw the attention, even Austin Reeves to a lesser degree, draw all that attention. And if you're the Lakers, you definitely need a guy like him on the team, right? You need a guy like him on the team because of the fact that you're 21st in defensive rating in the NBA, and you're also 19th in three-point percentage. So definitely a guy that can help fix those areas, trying to buttress. I see the vision, right? I see the vision. Is he going to move the needle for them? That remains to be seen. We'll see. And another thing, with what they traded, you know, with D'Angelo Russell being an asset, right, and Maxwell Lewis also being an asset, I wonder how many more moves they can make. Now, obviously, I still believe they have some of their first-round picks. They have other guys on the roster they could move, but I'm not sure what the ceiling is for this team. Any moves that can make that can expand the ceiling to a point where they can actually contend for a championship. So I still have them in my trying to find themselves tier. Maybe they'll move to potentially continue to contend after I see how, Dorian Finney-Smith meshes with this Laker team and how it actually looks as an on-the-court product. In the tier next, I have the Warriors. Here in this potentially contend tier, the Warriors, the Heat, the Hawks, and the Minnesota Timberwolves, who've moved up a tier as well. Let's turn our attention towards Minnesota here for a moment. The Timberwolves, right? The biggest thing, the biggest storyline to me in this season for the Timberwolves is, do they miss Karl-Anthony Towns? Do they miss Cat? Obviously, I haven't covered this trade in depth, right? But the T-Wolves did trade Karl-Anthony Towns to the Knicks in exchange for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, Keita Bates-Diop, and a protected future first-round pick. The Charlotte Hornets were also involved in this trade, but I just kind of wanted to isolate it on just the New York and Minnesota element in this particular context, right? I am aware that this is a 3-team deal, but I'm just kind of keying in on these elements here as it pertains to Minnesota and New York. So do they miss Karl-Anthony Towns? Well, if we take a look at where they were, some prospective stats last year, right? And some comments kind of back this up. Anthony Edwards was asked earlier this season what the problem was effectively with the offense for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he gave an answer about feeling limited offensively, right? Being limited and not having enough spacing at times. And I think that is backed up with what we see in the stats, right? Minnesota in 2023-2024 were 10th in isolation frequency, 16th in points per possession in isolation, and then 15th in isolation score frequency, right? So, they were middle of the road, or they were top 10 in how much they used isolation, and then middle of the road in terms of how much they were actually able to execute in isolation and have success when they were going into isolation. But this season in 2024-2025, the Timberwolves are 6th, so they upped how much they use isolation because of the fact, right, when you go down to it, me and a friend were talking about this, because initially when I delve into why the Timberwolves were struggling, because a lot of their key markers and statistics remained the same from a season ago, right? But when you feel more limited offensively, like we are more limited offensively, right? Well, this kind of backs it up, right? When you're less limited, when you feel this way, when you feel more limited, you feel like you need to do everything yourself, right? You rely heavier on isolation, you rely heavier on the ISO. And to me, when you do that, you get maybe at times more inefficient when that's not your bread and butter per se, right? And so Minnesota, they're now 6th in isolation frequency and 28th in points of possession, right? So remember, they were 16th a season ago in points per possession, and 15th in isolation frequency. So they dropped to almost the bottom of the league when they upped how much they were using isolation in their offensive game plan. So to me, when I look at it from that perspective, the limitations that Anthony Edwards is referring to, the limitations that he's talking about, it can be reflected in how they've played up until this point and why they're not having as much success offensively as they might have had a season ago. Now, mind you, their offensive rating isn't that much off different than last year, as this season in particular, they're 21st in offensive rating. In a season ago, they were 17th. I know it's a 4th place difference, but it's not that much different, but there is a decrease, right? And that to me matters, especially when you look at how they've performed in clutch games as well, right? When you look at it, a season ago, they were 21-15 in clutch games, which was 8th in the NBA, right? And now they're 10-10 in clutch games this season, tied for 17th. Because of when you get into those late game situations, right, where the score is tight and it's close, and you isolate so much, you have been, right, the defense can key in on it, and it's relatively predictable and it's easier to defend, right? So a heavier reliance on isolation to me is the reason why Minnesota has struggled to the degree, because of the fact that they felt limited. And I think they feel limited because of the lack of spacing, right? And why did that lack of spacing go away? Because they no longer have Karl-Anthony Towns, right? Karl-Anthony Towns in his own right, let's pay him some respect, is having a phenomenal season for the New York Knicks, averaging 24.5 points per game, 54% from the field, 44.7% from three, averaging 13 boards and 3.4 assists, and 83.2% from the free throw line. He leads the Knicks in rebounding and three-point percentage, and the Knicks are winners of their last 10. You're going to see them in the tiers going forward, and they're currently 3rd in the East. So Karl-Anthony Towns, that shooting, that spacing, he's now giving to New York, right? Meanwhile, on the Minnesota side with Julius Randle, he hasn't had that efficient of a season, right? Especially when it comes to three-point percentage, right? He's shooting 36.4% from three. Now, caveat for Minnesota, I had them move up because of the fact that they've won their last 3 games. And in those last 3 games, Julius Randle has shot the ball better. And not just him, Donte DiVincenzo. Donte DiVincenzo is shooting 35.6% from the three-point line this season, but in the last 3 games, he's averaging 19.7 points while shooting 51% from the field and 51.9% from 3, right? So maybe Minnesota is starting to turn the corner, if you will, in terms of less reliance on isolation and more reliance on ball movement and spacing and trying to get the open 3, knock down shots, and get their offense up, because their defense is still top 10. They're still top 10 in defensive rating, which is part of the reason why I struggled to kind of figure out what was going on with them as it pertains to why they were underperforming this season. But they have won 3 straight. They are 3 games over 500, and that's why I had them move up a tier, right? As we continue here, going back through it, right, we then have the Los Angeles Clippers, who are in this potentially contending to contend tier, along with the Milwaukee Bucks, right? And now the actually contending to contend tier, we have the Orlando Magic, who have suffered just a litany of injuries and are still finding ways to scrape through some games, right? The Denver Nuggets, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Houston Rockets, and the New York Knicks. I have to give the New York Knicks a lot of credit here, right? Remember, if you have been following the tiers, they started very relatively low on my first tier system in the potentially finding themselves tier. Well, now they've climbed all the way up to the contending contend, right? And they're very close to me to being a team that actually can scare Boston, right? So in the month of December, right, they finished the month of December 11-2, right? They were 3rd in offensive rating, 4th in defensive rating, and 3rd in overall net rating throughout the course of December. And in the course of December, you had Jalen Brunson, who was on fire, averaged 24.4 points per game. We already talked about how well Karl-Anthony Towns played, right? You had Mikal Bridges averaging 21 points per game, 21.5 points per game, off 56% shooting from the field, 43% shooting from 3. Josh Hart, who continues to be an outstanding rebounder for his size, 15.2 points per game, 8.8 boards per game, 5.2 assists, kind of does everything for them, right? 51% from the field, 42.6% from 3. And OG Anunoby, who may not have been shooting the ball as well from 3, but still provides a level of defense and knocks down the timely shot occasionally that New York will need. So to me, they're getting contributions from everybody that they need to get contributions from. Karl-Anthony Towns is having a spectacular season, an all-star for sure, along with Jalen Brunson. Mikal Bridges is giving you what you need. Josh Hart has been that Swiss Army knife for them, and OG Anunoby has done a great job defensively as well. So definitely had to show the Knicks some love in this contending to contend tier. And then the Can We Scare Boston tier remains relatively untouched, right? The Cavs, who have been stellar. Goodness gracious, they've been stellar to this point. At times, I want to put them right in that tier with Boston, but I'm also very much aware of the concept of championship hangover, right? I don't want to overreact to how Boston has dropped some of these games that they should have won over the course of the past couple of weeks. So I'm still going to keep Boston in that tier by themselves as the reigning champs. And obviously we have OKC and Dallas as well. Dallas, we're going to keep our eye on too. Luka being hurt for the next couple of weeks definitely scares me, but I'm going to keep them there because they have done a good job of maintaining, their head above water without Luka this season. I believe they are 6-3 or 7-3 without Luka this season. So I'm not going to overreact to them, but we'll keep our eye on them. But that is my tier systems. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Always love hearing why people think a certain team should be higher or a certain team should be lower. Keep it civil and let me know in the comment section below. Leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.